us out. And we are also looking for volunteers in the social media team. So at this point, I will turn it over to Zaheer and Zuhayeer to give us an overview of Levels.fyi.
Awesome.
Welcome, Zaheer and Zuhayeer.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Great to be here. I think this is our third event with Women Who Code, and so excited to be back. Yeah, so I'm Zaheer. My co-founder has a very similar name, but I'll let him introduce himself too.
Hey everyone, my name is Zaheer. Yeah, excited to be doing another event with Women Who Code. We've done some in the past, I think, on negotiation as well as compensation, and we love doing these types of events because it's kind of right in our alley. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, and just a little bit about Levels.fyi. Hopefully some of you have heard about our website, but our broader mission is to kind of help people make better career decisions. We've been around for around 4 years now, and we cover things like compensation, or like basically things about companies, including compensation, benefits, insights, jobs, things like that. And our most recent development has been our negotiation service, where we've helped thousands of people negotiate their offers, and we've negotiated upwards of $32 million in total compensation for folks who are in the recruitment process. And we're really excited to kind of have our lead negotiator from Levels.fyi with us here today, Sarah. And with that, I'll kind of pass it on to her to kind of go into some of her learnings through Levels.fyi.
Thank you, Zuhayeer and Zaheer. Over to you, Sarah, to go over your presentation.
Yeah, it's just a quick introduction about myself. I've been in technical recruiting space for almost over 5 years. And I've had experience working with smaller companies, so startup all the way to FAANG company. And my previous experience came from Amazon, Google, as well as Facebook. And I've been with Levels for a few months now. It's been such an amazing journey to help other people understand their compensation as well as negotiate their salary. That said, I think I'm gonna go straight into my presentation. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, awesome. So this is a really interesting statistic that we found and I've seen this firsthand as a recruiter too, when male candidates tend to more likely to negotiate versus female candidates. And a lot of the time, I actually don't know what was the fear behind it. What I hear the most as a negotiation coach is a lot of concern center around, what if I negotiate? Does it mean that I'm going to lose the offer? If I negotiate for more, does it mean that I have to overperforming or have to put in more effort, because if I negotiate for a higher salary and I don't perform up to that standard, what does it mean for my career? And a lot of concern also is around, if a lot of the time the misconception comes from, they think that their manager get visibility into this process of the negotiation, and the truth is manager has no idea what's happening. So the compensation conversation usually would just be between you and your recruiter. And why should you negotiate? Company expect you to negotiate, and a lot of companies now, especially in the state of California as well as Washington, and there are other 29 states that have been pushing really hard on equal pay. What that means for companies is that these audits actually happen on an annual basis. So just to make sure that they cover their bases, most of the time companies will start every candidate out at the lowest number of the compensation band. So usually a lot of the time too, as a candidate, as a recruiter, I will extend the first offer to everyone, and sometimes 30% to 50% of the population will accept the offer. But for the other 50%, when they want to push back on the compensation or asking for a higher salary, there is still room for me to give the candidate if they have the right reason or justification as to why they're asking for a higher package. And why should you negotiate? It's so much easier to negotiate now versus having to ask for a raise or wait for promotions later. Most of the time too, for a lot of more established or public companies, promotion usually happen like 2-3 years after. Sometimes it almost doesn't even happen. And then asking for a raise, we haven't seen a lot of people actually successfully ask for a raise, especially with larger company, anywhere from like 1,000 employee or larger. And then understand your compensation. This is the part that's really tricky in terms of, as a recruiter, I have this frustration too when a candidate tried to negotiate, but they just completely missed the mark in terms of like what the company has to offer. And negotiation go two ways. Company would have to respect and value your talent, but at the same time, you would have to understand and respect the company compensation philosophy as well. Usually for compensation package, a lot of the company will use a term such as total compensation. And what does that mean? Every company has a different total compensation structure. Some company will offer a base salary, stock, as well as performance bonus. Some company, usually startup stage where they don't have a lot of cash, they probably won't offer you a bonus, but they'll give you base as well as stock. And for some companies that are in the financial sector, they won't give you stock options. They will just offer you like a really high base salary and just an annual performance bonus. Now, for some companies that have a really competitive package, for example, Google, Facebook, Snap, for example, they, beyond just base, stock, and bonus, what they typically will also offer you is an annual comp adjustment. What is comp adjustment? Comp adjustment is an increase in your base salary anywhere from 2% all the way upward to 8%. And that usually is to cover for inflation or living costs. On top of that, some company also offer you an annual stock refresher. And the stock refresher will also vest over 4 years. So essentially the company is saying, we value your talent, we want you to be here, so we want to reward you for being loyal to us. So the longer you stay with the company, essentially the more you're gonna make. So understanding the total compensation structure is really important. So most of the time when a candidate just come in and be very firm on a base salary and they don't take stock or bonus into consideration, it's really hard for me to, as a recruiter, to even, have that conversation with them. So as a candidate, in that first call with your recruiter, ask a lot of questions. If you're not clear in terms of like how stock or bonus work, be sure to ask those questions and ask, besides base, stock, and bonus, is there anything else that you guys offer so that I can evaluate the package as a whole? And this part is really interesting. And I think that a lot of people don't know about this. With each position, there's always a compensation range. So within the range, it's a pretty wide range, as you can see here. And within each compensation range, we also break it up into like 3 sub ranges. One is the minimum range, medium, and maximum. Most of the time, the recruiter and the company would want to land you in the medium here. And no one will ever start you at the max. And usually a lot of companies don't like to land the candidate at the max range because they want to have that extra room if they want to give you bonus or anything like that. So this is why the recruiter will always ask you, what is your salary expectation? Because the range is pretty wide and they're just trying to see where you want to be, just so that they can be proactive about the offer stage when you get to that point. And how wide is the range? The higher up you go in the organization, the wider this range gets. So for example, at a company like Amazon, let's say L4, which is more on like the junior side, the starting point would be anywhere at 132K K in total comp for a software engineer, and the max number that you can get to is going to be 190K. So pretty big range there for you to negotiate. But for a level higher, which is level 5, that would be mid-level, the compensation can start in the 230K range, and it can go all the way upward to 330K range for the Bay Area. And then as you go, one level higher, which is senior, the range can get even wider than that, where it can start at 350, and the max number that you can get to would be anywhere in the 450K to the 460K range total compensation. So as you can see, because the range is so wide, this is kind of why the company would have to break it up into like 3 subcategory just to make the management process, the compensation planning process a little bit easier. So most of the time, if you don't share compensation expectation, the recruiter will always land you in the minimum range here. So within the minimum range, where the recruiter will land you exactly, a lot of the time too, it also would depend on the recruiter preference. For a few companies, for example, Facebook and Google, because they are trying to implement the equal pay for everyone, most of the time the recruiter would land you at the lowest number of the minimum range. Where you want to be is going up like way outside of the medium range. You would want to be in between the medium, if not within like the midpoint of the maximum here. So this is kind of why you always want to negotiate, because everyone will start you at the minimum rate, minimum range. If you accept, great, not a lot of work for the recruiter, but if you push back, there's still a lot of room to go. So keep that in mind next time when you go through the negotiation process. This is also really important about leveling. So as you can see here, to my point earlier, the higher up you go in the organization, the wider the range get. As you can see here, E3, which is more like the junior level for Facebook, the range is pretty narrow. And then as you go to level 6, 7, and 8, those positions are pretty high up, and the range is getting larger and larger. For a senior level and upward, usually the recruiting team and the HR team, as well as the team that you're going to be on, there's a lot of things that they can do for you at this stage. Sometimes too, they can go above that max point if you have compelling story and reasons why you deserve that number. And at this level too, it's much harder to find talent. So if you happen to be in like the senior range and above, don't hesitate to ask for a number that you want to be at. And this is also really important. So when I've been getting a lot of questions around, hey, my friends got in with this company 2 years ago, and he or she got a lot more in terms of equity versus my offer right now, seems like the recruiter just won't move on equity at all. So usually when a company plan for compensation, a lot of companies would do compensation planning once a year. Usually it happened around like September all the way to November, and then you would get like the new compensation band for January of the year after. When we look at compensation for a candidate or an employee, we usually look at it 4 years out. So for example, if we give you at this base, which is 190K, and if we give you 400K in equity vesting over 4 years, that would bring you 100K per year for equity, and then a 10% bonus. This is kind of where it gets really interesting. Let's say last year, we've seen a lot of companies just completely outperform in terms of their equity. For example, Snap had 115% growth, where it was around like $20, $30 per share. Now it's almost $70 per share. Same with Amazon, it was $1,800, now it's $3,000. So for a lot of companies that have seen that huge growth in the equity for the past couple of years, they can say, hey, we're thinking that our stock is going to continue this at the same rate. And if stock continue to grow at this stage, 4 years away from now, we don't want your compensation to be way, way, way outside of the range. And they're not doing that just because they don't want to pay you more or anything like that. But let's say if your compensation is way outside of the range for 3 or even 4 years away from now, what it means for your area is that it makes it really expensive for the locals to be there. And a lot of the time too, when it comes to compensation, it goes beyond to just like what the company wants to do. A lot of the time they have a lot of pushback from the state or even federal level in terms of like, here's what they can do and here's what they cannot do. So understanding this from a company perspective is also super helpful. If you happen to interview with a company that have like that huge growth in terms of equity, you may not be able to negotiate a lot in equity. However, sign-on bonus is something that a lot of company would be more flexible on. So if, let's say, the recruiter come back to you and say, base we're max here, equity we're pretty much max here for you, performance bonus isn't something that you get to negotiate, it's pretty standard across the board. Usually that's not final yet. Keep pushing for a little bit more to get that sign-on bonus. And sign-on bonus is a lot more flexible just because it's a one-time lump sum of cash. It doesn't grow like stock. It doesn't interfere with your compensation package for a year away from now. So understanding that from the company also will help you negotiate your salary better, or knowing which area that you can ask for. So this question comes up a lot when I feel like everyone get tripped up on this question. This question either comes up in the first call with your recruiter. This question might come up again right before your on-site interview. This question might come up again after the recruiter told you that the company want to move forward with an offer, but they withholding that information from you until you tell them what it is that you're looking for, how you should answer these questions. If the recruiter happened to bring up this question during that first call, pretty normal for them to ask these questions because, kind of to my point earlier, the compensation range is pretty wide. They just want to kind of gauge your where you want to be and whether or not you would be within the range. But knowing that every company has different levels, and different levels come with different compensation band too, it is a little bit too early for you to talk about it. And you can let them know that, hey, I appreciate the questions. However, we're still early in the process. Do you mind if we talk about this? Do you mind we discuss number like later in the process when we have more of a data point in terms of like what level am I being considered for? Another thing too, sometimes this question come up again after the onsite, even they told you, hey, we want to move forward, but we can't give you that number until you give us that number first. I've seen that happen more so recently, just, I don't know. It's also dependent on the recruiter preference, but some recruiters tend to be a little bit more aggressive with this process, or they trying to stop you from negotiating, or they don't want to do that back and forth with you. So they're just trying to get a number from you just so that they can, give you close to what you want or at what you want. So then, they can wrap up the process a little bit faster and cleaner. Before you answer these questions, to know your rights. You don't have to say anything, or you don't have to share anything that you're not comfortable with. In fact, in the state of California and Washington, as a candidate, legally speaking, you can ask for a compensation range at this place. And instead of telling them your number, flip it back on them and ask them, hey, I actually, I'm currently at my company here, and we're not comparing apple to apple in terms of compensation. Every company has a different compensation structure. I haven't been on the job market for quite some time. Would it be possible for you to share that number with me first, and we can go from there? And when you request for a compensation like that, legally speaking, the recruiter would have to share that first number with you. And if the recruiter has to share that first number with you, keep in mind too, that first number sometimes can feel really low because they just trying to play it safe by giving you the lowest number or within a number within that minimum range. The second thing too is sometimes you're going to have those recruiters who are a little bit more aggressive, even though you request them to start you out with the number first. They will push back on you and say, no, to make it easier on the both of us, why don't you just really think about a number, and then we can go from there. Let them know, because every company has a different compensation structure. You can't really share that number until you understand their compensation philosophy better. What does compensation looks like for company X? Like what goes into it? Do they offer an annual bonus? Do they offer equity? Do they offer comp adjustment for base to cover for inflation and living costs? Do they offer additional stock refresher? Is any extra award that they give for top performing employees? So I would say try to get this information first before you share that number. And if you got all those information and you're still not sure what to say, you pull all the stops and the recruiters still wouldn't give you a number. Don't try to not give a number still at this stage. Just let the recruiter know, hey, would it be possible for me to just take some time and think about this? A lot of the time too, what I've seen from my clients as well as other candidates, when a recruiter tend to be a little bit more aggressive this way, the candidate just get really nervous and just blurt out a number. And then later on, they regret for sharing that number, or they would try to send an email right after to kind of like backpedal on what they shared earlier. And sometimes too, the moment that you share a number, the recruiter will hold you to it. So be very careful in terms of what you share in terms of salary expectations here. But most of the time for bigger company, they are really respectful about when you push back and say, would it be possible for you to share a number with me first? Generally speaking, they're pretty good at that. But if you happen to get more aggressive recruiter, you know what to do now. In terms of like general tactics here, the myth about competing offers, for some company, the only company that I see right now that you would really need competing offers would be Google. But other company, you don't really need competing offer in order to negotiate. This is why understanding your compensation structure, your compensation package is really helpful. So for example, if a company doesn't offer you an annual bonus, what it means is that what you get now, that will be it for a couple years away from now. So, let's say if they don't also offer for a compensation adjustment, things like that, you would want to take that into consideration. Inflation right now is around 2.5%. It tends to go up over the year. Living costs also keep, going up. If a company doesn't offer any extra bonus once you start, you would want to mention that with them. Hey, since there's no other bonuses offered to me, I plan on being in this position for quite some time. Can we discuss more about, for me to have a higher base salary? Because if I'm looking at it like 3 or 4 years away from now, 150K today might seems like a lot, but 4 years away from now, that might not be the case. And double tap on like how long you want to be with the company. And usually a lot of the time, recruiter tend to be, they accept these reasons really well because it's true. And this is also another area that would be really great to share too. There's a misconceptions that FAANG company pay the most in terms of cash comp. That's not true anymore. We've seen startup company, even at Series A startup company, base salary is comparable to FAANG company, if not higher now. So in terms of a base salary, what makes sense usually is also dependent on your job family as well as the location that you're in. So ask questions, ask a lot of questions, and usually the first offer that you get from the recruiter, the base salary is always the lowest number of that component. A lot of the time too, I've seen this complaint happen quite a lot in terms of I don't hear back from my recruiter, or the recruiter is pressuring me in terms of a deadline. I have to make a decision ASAP. The recruiter and the team, they've spent a lot of time and effort in terms of hiring. They need someone in that seat, since yesterday. So they will always try to hustle you to sign the offer as soon as possible. But as a candidate, you're in the driver's seat here. The deadline isn't, I don't want to say that it's not real, but it's not like a hard rule. So if you can always renegotiate for a deadline here. The only time that I would say it might be impossible to negotiate for a deadline is when, let's say the recruiter give you an offer today and you want to think about the offer for about a month later. That's a little bit too far out for a few teams to even accept that. But if you just want to, have an additional like week or 2 weeks to think about it, usually it's completely fine. Just bring it up with your recruiter, be honest with them in terms of like why you're looking for the deadline extension. A lot of the time we advise our client to bring up such as, if you have a tight deadline that you want more time to think about the offer because you've been pretty tied up with work, or you want to think it through and talk it through with your partner, your family, because it's a really big and important decisions. And then another thing too is sometimes when you interview, you probably interview with more than 3 companies and you are trying to wait to hear out, you trying to wait to see if other company would get back to you. I would let the recruiter know that too, in a sense of like, hey, I've had other companies in my pipeline. Just from like the respect point of view here, they already took the time to schedule the interview for me, and I would want to go through with that process before I can give you an answer. If you're honest like that, most of the time I haven't seen any recruiter push back on that unless if they have a very urgent need to fill this position ASAP, which then they will let you know that too. But generally speaking, a month, 2 weeks to a month extension is not bad at all when it gets a little bit like, when you ask for an extension for more than a month. And it's completely normal at this stage too for a recruiter not give you anything in writing just yet. A lot of the time, the process would look like the recruiter will share that first number with you on the call. If you didn't share any expectation with them, you ask for some time to think about it, and then you renegotiate with the offer. Usually the back and forth will take about like a week to 2 weeks. If possible, after that first call with the recruiter, be sure to send a recap email, just to kind of have something in writing there. I've seen this happen a few times when the candidate sometimes misheard the offer, when the recruiters say your total compensation is 150K and the candidate got 105 for whatever reasons. And because the number will kind of misalign there, things can go south really fast with the negotiation when the candidate come back and say, hey, I'm looking for a total compensation of 150. And the recruiter would go back and say, well, we're already at 150 already. So make sure that you send a recap email right after that. Also, a lot of the time too, this happened more so with a startup company when a recruiter might say, I can offer you 0.15% in equity. But then later on, when they send over the written offer only says 0.11%. And this is when it gets a little bit tricky to kind of go back to that conversation. So usually because they don't give you anything in writing, try to send that recap email just to make sure that you two are on the same page. What I would recommend for you to negotiate is try to do it over via email instead of on a call. And the reason why is when you try to negotiate on a call, you open a lot of doors for the recruiter to corner you. When you do things live, there's just a lot of emotions involved. You can get really nervous, or maybe the way that you explain the reasons why you're asking for a higher compensation, just not quite there. And usually too, for any recruiter to get you to that max number, typically they would have to double check with the compensation team first or get an approval from higher up management before they can give you or come back to you with a revised offer. So because of that, if you share your reasons over the phone with the recruiter, you're counting on this person to be your messenger. You can say the most perfect thing on the call, but if your recruiter maybe didn't write things down correctly, or they didn't do as good of a job explaining the reasons to the compensation team and upper management team, if they don't see like the reasons are compelling enough, they may not approve that request. So for you to do everything over via email, it's so much easier on you. You don't have to, say all this over the phone. It's, less taxing on you as well. And then it's so much easier for the recruiter just to take that email and go straight to the compensation team or upper management. You get to control your narrative a lot better that way. things you don't, risk playing telephone throughout this process. Things can go south really fast if like certain things get miscommunicated. Another thing too is once you, like, okay, a lot of you probably be asking, I get it. Okay, hear you on that. I'm gonna do everything over via email. I understand my total compensation now. I know, everything that I need to do. How should I actually go about the negotiation process? Competing offers help, but you don't always need a competing offer. Another thing that a lot of the time candidates don't think about is take inventory of what you have. So for example, if you walk away from your current employer right now, let's say your current employer offer you an annual 10% bonus, if you leave your company right now and join a new company, chances are you're not going to get payout for the 5 months or 4 months that you already worked at your current company, because you're not staying until the end of the year for that payout month. But at the same time, you didn't work at this company from January until April, for example, you don't get that bonus from them either. And for some of you who probably currently working at another tech company, for example, if you happen to get equity, you probably will walk away from a lot of invested equity as well. So you want to communicate these two things to your recruiter. Hey, the reason why I'm asking for a higher package now is because I want to, be mindful of the cash bonus that I'll be losing as well as my invested stock. And then if there's any other thing that you think would be helpful for you to share, please do that. So for example, I've had a few candidates who they have to move. They have to move from a lower cost living area to somewhere more expensive, and it costs them extra in terms of like finding a new apartment and things like that. This go beyond just a relocation package. And sometimes too, for some of them, they would have to relocate their family, and usually the relocation package is only covered for them. They would bring it up with me, which I thought, yeah, that's a really good thing to think about. Like for, thank you for the relocation package at $15,000. However, you have, that candidate maybe have a family of 4, it costs a lot more. They use that as a reason, and the recruiter was able to justify that in front of the compensation team to give that candidate more of a sign-on bonus to help them out with the transition process there. Another thing too, if your current company offer any continuing education, a lot of folks would get their MBA or their master's degree paid from the employer, but the new employer doesn't offer that. You would want to figure out like how much it would cost you to pay out of pocket to continue your master's degree, for example, and you would want to mention that as your forfeited cash to this new employer, and they will take that into consideration to give you a more equity or B, more sign-on bonus. And then lastly, you can mention any competing offers that you have, but most of the time what I found is that you don't really need competing offers. Like I said, the only company that would need a competing offer from you right now would be Google, but other company, if you just share with them your expectations at the negotiation stage, a few reasons why you're asking for this number, anything that you'll be losing at your current company, and then pointing out like a few market research that you've done, compensation team will see that as a strong enough reason to approve you for that package. Usually, sometimes too, just because you negotiate the first time and the recruiter come back to you with a new number, it doesn't mean that that number is final. Most of the time, it takes about like 2 back and forth for you to truly get to that max number. So for example, let's say the max compensation for a software engineer in the Bay Area, I'm making this number up. Let's say the max number is $100,000. The recruiter start you at $25,000, for example. You go back and you ask the recruiter like, hey, I'm looking for a number closer to $100,000. The recruiter already got approved for $100,000, but the recruiter will still come back to you and try to offer you something lower. Hey, I went to the compensation team, I can offer you 75K. What do you say? A lot of the time, candidate would just think, okay, it's already more than the first offer. I already negotiated. I'm eager to wrap this process up. I'm just gonna go with this offer and sign the offer now. However, they don't know that if they just push back for a little bit more, like, hey, I appreciate you jumping through all the hoops. Is there a chance that you can work with the comm team one more time to see if we can come in closer to 100K? Most of the time the recruiter do come back and say, all right, we can offer you 95K now. We've seen that happen a lot. And like, I've done that myself as a recruiter too, when I was still, extending offer to all of my candidates. So usually there's going to be two back and forth. Don't get discouraged when you get that revised offer and it's still not close to something that you're looking for. Now, sometimes some recruiter don't want to do that back and forth. So if you negotiate, they will most likely try to max everything out as much as possible. If it's truly the max number, the recruiter will let you know that. And how you know that it's going to be like the true max number, usually because a recruiter feel like I already exhaust all of my options, I max out base, I max out equity, I max out bonus, everything. And the number is still not quite close to the number that you're looking for. This is where the recruiter might offer a 30 minutes call for you to connect with your manager. What they are trying to do is have the manager just sell you on the non-monetary component of the offer, for example, growth, what you're going to be working on, the team, etc. So when a recruiter kind of pull this last stop of like, okay, let's have you talk to the manager, that's a pretty good clue for you to know that you're kind of inching into that max number and they feel like they might lose you. And that's why they would have to kind of schedule this 30 minutes for you and your manager to connect. Another thing to know, like, where, like, is my offer final? Is it not final? How can I tell? It's going to be on sign-on bonus. So for a company that are at seed stage to Series B funding, usually they don't offer a sign-on bonus yet. But for any company at the Series B funding or higher than that, or even more established companies like the Fang or even Snapchat, Uber, Pinterest, things like that, if they don't offer you a sign-on bonus yet, that's a really good clue for you to know that there's still room, keep going. A sign-on bonus is just that rainy day fund for me as a recruiter. Let's say I already exhaust all of the options, base, equity, bonus, and you're still not happy with that number. This is like the extra money that the companies say, hey, we're gonna give you, this emergency fund for you to use if you have the right candidate and you need to make a much better, more competitive offer. You can open up this emergency saving fund and give it to that candidate. So if I don't have to dip my hand into that emergency fund jar, I don't want to do that. But if I have to, there's extra money for me. So that's why when a recruiter give you a sign-on bonus, usually that number would be anywhere from like $10,000 can go all the way upward to $50,000. That's the average range that we've been seeing. If they offer you that sign-on bonus already, or if it's like anywhere within that range, that's a really good clue for you to see that my offer is pretty final and the recruiter wasn't lying, that this is truly the max that they can do. Awesome. And then other things to negotiate for. So beyond just, the money that we're talking about here, other things, I get these questions a lot too. Can I negotiate for more PTO? Can I negotiate to work from home 2 times a week? Can I negotiate for better benefits? Can I negotiate for other things? The answer is it really depends. So for a smaller company, like a startup company, it is a lot easier to negotiate for these things because of the size of the company. For a more established companies, so around like 1,000 or larger, it's going to be really tough for them to accommodate one-off requests like this. Usually too, it's not because the company doesn't want to accommodate you for these things. There's just a lot of red tape being put around person benefits for a company at 1,000 employee or higher. Usually if they have to do it for you, they would have to do it for other employees as well. So this is where for a bigger company, it's going to be much harder for you to negotiate extra perks and benefits, but for a smaller company, always bring it up with them. And I think that's everything that I have. So I'm just going to open the floor for Q&A and questions now.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. That was a really informative presentation, and I'm sure everybody who's on the call learned a lot. So at this point, feel free to leave questions. I see some questions in chat, but I'm going to give more priority to the ones that are on Slido, and then we'll hopefully find time to address the ones on chat. So let me share my screen here. So here's the Slido.
Oh, lots of questions.
Yeah, lots. Yeah. So I think we can, yeah, some of them might be repetitive, but we'll try to address, all of them possible. Yeah. So Sarah, how should I approach a hiring manager if I want to ask for more?
So I would assume that this question came from someone who maybe the company is a little bit smaller and there isn't a recruiting team in place and they have to talk anything numbers directly to the hiring manager. Usually at the hiring stage, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of like asking for what you want, similar to how you would ask a recruiter. Make a really strong case for yourself. Market rate, here's the range. 2 is if I leave my current employer, here are all the things that I will be losing. And then lastly, any competing offers that they have.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think rest of what you just mentioned was already covered in the presentation. So yeah, thanks for the answer. So this one is it possible to renegotiate the salary once you've already started with a lower number? So means like you started off with a lower number and you realize that you made a mistake because you did the research later on. Is it possible to say, hey, I want to start off, I'm not happy with the number that I proposed, but I am asking for like 30K or 40K more. So yeah.
As long as you didn't sign the offer, you can still renegotiate your package. So if you already signed the offer and you try to renegotiate, usually this is kind of where an offer might get revoked. One is because an employment or an offer letter is actually a legally binding contract. So because you want to renegotiate that package, the recruiter most of the time would have to cancel that employment contract altogether to start a new one. Sometimes too, some recruiters don't want to do this and they'll just tell you no. But if you happen to share a really low number at the beginning from that first call with the recruiter and you do your research and later on in the process, you realize, wow, I actually kind of shot myself in the foot there. I should have gave a higher number. It's always, you don't have to, don't feel bad about telling the recruiter in terms of, hey, I know we touched on compensation before. However, after going through the interview process and talking to a few other companies as well as doing my market research, that number changed for me. The range that I'm targeting now is X to Y instead, or always try to get the recruiter to give you that first number instead of sharing them a number to them. And if you have to kind of backpedal on your word earlier, just let them know that your expectation changed because of market research, or maybe you did a much more thorough calculation from your current salary, as well as hearing the number from other companies.
Okay. So how do we negotiate without having competing offers? And I think we already discussed that, right? We said like Google is probably the only company which kind of requires a competing offer. So you can answer that. Can you negotiate if you do not have a lot of experience? If so, how do you do? So that I think a lot of it got covered. If there are any additional data points that you have, Sarah, feel free to raise those.
Yeah, so for a more of a junior position, usually the increase, you are going to get an increase, but the increase is going to be a lot smaller versus like a senior position or higher. Same thing apply here in terms of let the recruiter start with the number first, think about it, come back with a better ask, and then usually too for a junior position, you might not see a sign-on bonus. So sign-on bonus usually doesn't get introduced until you mid-level or higher.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. If you don't get the raise you asked for, like it's more like, you're already in the company, you've been there for a year or so, or maybe more, and then you asked for a raise or whatever raise you were given, you're not happy with, and you asked for a higher raise. And if that didn't go through, is it better to look for options outside? Do you have to leave the company, or is it okay to stick around?
This is kind of like more like a you questions. How does that, what does that look like for you if you stay at your current company? Let's say if you have been at the company for 2 to 3 years, you're almost up for a promotion. So I would say, it might be worth it for you to, bring these things up with your manager in terms of like the raise. What is it that you're looking for? What does the promotion process looks like for you? And what are the things that you can do to kind of expedite the promotion process? Because when you start with a new company, the clock restart too. So a lot of the times too, for an employee who's about to get promoted, it might be worth it for them to stay, but also it's dependent on what that person thinks. Sometimes too, the employee just feel very, I don't know, bitter about, oh, wow, like I started out a lot lower. I'm asking for a raise. I'm doing a lot more. I'm asking for promotion. I've done everything and nothing is working for me. At that stage, after you interview with a few other company, and if you see that there's, better, if you see a better career growth elsewhere, it might be worth it to explore other options. So ultimately, it really depends on like, what do you want to do with your career?
Yeah. So how reliable is Levels.fyi? User-reported salaries are a good ballpark, but how do you know what the company pays for in the same role? It's more like, how do you actually get all the data is what the person is interested in finding out.
I will turn this question to Zaheer.
Yeah, I can touch on it a little bit. In terms of how we collect data, we actually have 3 ways that we kind of aggregate data on Levels.fyi currently. So you're definitely self-reported is one of them, and it's probably our largest way that we collect information right now. But we also have a few other ways. So we also have a verified upload where people can upload proof document for their offer letter, W-2 statement, pay stub, or any other kind of verified proof document to basically verify the salary data point that they're submitting. And we use that as an anchor to kind of substantiate the rest of the website and the data on the rest of the website. And we also collect data we also use the data. We are exposed to a ton of offers through the negotiation service, which helps us kind of understand and keep in tabs with what the market is paying. And that helps kind of put our website into ground truth. And in addition to that, we also have basic statistical kind of tools where we filter out outliers in our visualizations and kind of only look at kind of the most recent information to kind of provide the most accurate data. So a lot of the Levels.fyi information that you see, like for larger companies, Google, Facebook, like a lot of it is vetted, like even by employees at those companies, where they say it is accurate, like because we have just so much volume in terms of data points. But for like maybe smaller, like other companies, we have some work to do there. But you can still view those data points and use it as an anchor for your negotiation. So yeah, hope that answers the question a little bit.
It does. Thank you so much. Yeah. So moving on, I have successfully pretended to have other offers while negotiating, but I feel I shouldn't have to pretend to not get lowballed. Any alternatives? I think we kind of answered this, right?
Yeah.
We don't need a competing offer for companies other than Google, right? So yeah. So if there's anything else that you want to add, Sarah, please feel free.
No, I think I already covered that in the presentation.
Yeah. So past salary history is not allowed in CA. How do you dodge the salary expectation question in other states?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot more states that participate in the salary band policy. So salary band means that your potential employer cannot ask you what you are currently making, and you don't have to share your expectations either. For a lot of different states, for example, like Denver is one of them now, Seattle, or Washington and California, as well as New York and Boston. As a candidate, if you ask for a compensation range, the recruiter would have to share at least the minimum range with you. They're not obligated to share with you their true compensation range, but at least just the minimum range. There isn't anything out there to stop the recruiter from asking, what are you expecting? But just know that you don't have to share anything that you're not comfortable with. And I would always say, because leveling usually get determined throughout the entire process. So for example, at the beginning of the process, like on paper, they might consider you for a senior position, but let's say after multiple rounds of interview, let's say the interview panel feel like, they want to bring you in at a position where you will grow into, and not a position where you might feel like you're underwater all the time. This is where, like, after the on-site interview, a lot of the time down leveling might happen. You can bring it up with the recruiter too, like, hey, since we're not clear about leveling, I think it's a little bit premature to talk about this process now. Can we talk about numbers when we cross that bridge? And usually recruiters are pretty respectful and understanding. They won't push you further after you say that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. How do you negotiate to have a stocks heavy comp? Do you actually have ways to do that, or do they, do companies have limits around how much stocks they can provide for a certain role, or like, is there anything you can do to get more stocks? Yeah.
Usually there's some flexibility around stock, as well as the base salary and a sign-on bonus. A lot of the time, ask the recruiter what your total compensation is. So what does the total compensation even entail? Is it just base and bonus, or is it a component of three, equity, bonus, or base? Understand that part really well. Ask the recruiter directly, what is my annual total compensation then? Get that number directly from the recruiter. You can calculate that number yourself too, but it doesn't hurt just to confirm that number with the recruiter. A lot of the time, tech company would drive the conversation from a total compensation standpoint. So let's say they budget around, say, $100,000 for a junior software engineer in total compensation. Out of that $100,000, $50K would be your base salary, for example, maybe another $10K for bonus, which means that they have about like $40K wiggle room to give you more equity. For some companies, like I mentioned earlier, if they've had such a huge growth in equity in the last couple of years, they might put their foot down and say, hey, we're not going to give you more equity. We'll give you more base. We're going to keep equity the same from the initial offer. We'll give you more base and a sign-on bonus instead. So start the negotiation from a total compensation standpoint. Let the recruiter come back to you first with the new breakdown. That's also a really good clue for you to see which area that the companies are more flexible on and which part aren't. If the recruiter come back with a new offer and you see a higher base, higher sign-on bonus, but equity stay the same, usually it means that they are pretty firm on equity. It might be really difficult for you to ask for higher equity. But if a company comes back with base is the same, sign-on bonus not there yet, but a lot more in equity, that's a really good clue for you to see that you can ask for a lot more in equity. But drive the conversation from a total compensation standpoint, the first round of the negotiation.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, so I have seen job descriptions that specify a salary. Do I need to pay attention to the salary mentioned in the job description, or is it like low end of or the lower range of that particular role?
It is usually going to be on the lower end. So a lot of states just passed the salary or like equal pay policy. I think California just did that as of March this year, and then Denver passed that in January this year, a company are obligated to share with you the minimum range, but they're not obligated to share with you like their true range, like all the way from minimum to max.
Okay. So one question, what are the different things you should do before you close out on a verbal offer?
Send
So
a
this-
recap email right after that conversation, just to make sure that you two are on the same page when it comes to numbers.
Okay. Okay. So I think we kind of touched upon that as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
So how would you deal with a situation when a recruiter down levels you? So it's more like lowballing. What if they come back and say this is the max offer, right? Yeah.
Down leveling happens a lot, and I feel like it's really upsetting as a candidate, but I'm just playing devil advocate here, is at each level, the scope of work is different. So there's a lot more expectation for someone who may be a senior versus someone who is a non-senior. A lot of the time, not only that is dependent on your years of experience, but it's also dependent on your performance during the interview. The interviewers, the company, or even your manager want to bring you in at a level that you will do well and then eventually promote you, versus bring you in at a level where you just underwater all the time. Because historically speaking, for a lot of companies, they did that. They did take a chance on a candidate by not down leveling them and bring them in at a senior level. But what ended up happening was, because the learning curve or the scope of work is a lot larger, and they just a lot of things that you need to get used to in terms of like processes and operations for each company. A lot of the time, candidate just ended up leaving the company before the 1 year mark, or they don't end up doing well. And this is kind of where like managing out might happen. So manager will always try to be on a safer side by down leveling you if they feel like you didn't raise the bar during the interview process for that level. If the company did consider you for a senior and they down level you to a non-senior, it's going to be really difficult to renegotiate the leveling here. If they approve that, it's almost never happened. But for sometimes, let's say you make a really strong case, or even if the manager is willing to go through another round of follow-up interview, there's going to be extra interview that they have to do before they can up level you. But if they already if they already consider you for a senior and they down level you, the chance of being up level again is almost impossible.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So can you briefly give some strategies when advocating for yourself during annual review? So this is coming from salary raise standpoint, but yeah.
In terms of like the bonus at this stage, in terms of like annual review, usually this is the area where you don't have a lot of power in terms of negotiation. It's just take it or leave it from the company. So unfortunately, I don't have like how to go about negotiation, because for most of the time they don't even allow you to negotiate.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you're in, it's what I've seen is it's hard to ask for higher raises. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why you want to do it at the beginning. That's why you want to negotiate and not wait until once you're already there.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some tools to use as reference for baseline salary for a role?
Well, the first and most effective tool would be asking the recruiter to share that number with you. The second tool is going to be Levels.fyi.
Mhm.
In terms of like a base salary, it's also dependent on job family as well.
Okay. So when is it okay to ask for a raise to your employer?
I have seen this happen at Amazon, when an employee trying to ask for a raise maybe after 6 months with the company. I would say for some companies, 6 months is a little bit too soon to ask for that. So if a company is a little bit smaller, obviously there's not a lot of rules around, when would be the right time. It's just you're gonna have to do that judgment call in terms of like if your scope of work has changed, if you've taken on more responsibility, or you have started to yield results a lot faster than your manager anticipated you to do that. So this happened more so, for example, like sales position. Let's say if your quota is, $10,000 the first on a monthly basis, for example, and you started to do $30,000, which is you have exceeded your quota quite a bit. And after, if you have been consistently at the same volume, it makes sense for you to bring this up with your manager, maybe after like 6 months to a year. But for a bigger company, for example, like Amazon, for example, they do a performance review once a year. I would say wait until you get that first review before you can ask for a raise. When you ask for a raise before a performance review comes out, your manager or HR might just turn down that request because they don't have enough business justification to give you that raise yet.
Yeah, that's good data point. Yeah. So with the current COVID situation, what is the impact to salary raise given that people can work out of low cost areas? So what this means is people can basically move to low cost areas, and can they still get the salary raises they deserve?
In terms of, so I feel like what I read this question very differently. I think they may be asking if they are working remotely from a different state or area that's lower, that has like lower living costs, can they still get
the salary raise? Exactly. That's what the question means. Yeah.
So usually this is also dependent on the company. Some company have chose to go completely remote. For example, Stripe, for example, they don't really look at location into consideration. They'll just say, we break it up into tiers. So for example, tier 1 would be San Francisco Bay Area. Tier 2 would be Seattle and New York, and then tier 3 would just be everybody else. So they will pay by tier. So if you happen to live in, let's say, Denver, you're going to fall into tier 3, and they have a compensation band for tier 3. And if you've been working in San Francisco and you just happen to move to Denver during COVID, the company might choose to, they can let you keep the same pay. For a smaller company, they usually just like, okay, we don't need to redo our compensation structure. But for a bigger company, usually they would do like a pay adjustment. Usually it's not that much. It's like maybe 10% less than what you were getting in the Bay. But because the living cost is so low, the net pay comes out to be around the same.
Yeah. Okay, so I am going to be a full stack engineer at a 50% startup with a 90K offer. How much of a sign-in bonus should I ask for? I think we covered this a little bit, but if you want to sort of chime in.
I would need more information to answer these questions because I have no idea how many years of experience. 90K offer to start, that to me sounds like this position is more on the junior side.
Yeah.
I would say for, again, I don't know location either. Like the number might look very different in Seattle versus Bay Area versus Atlanta, for example.
Yeah. And also we kind of said that sign-in bonus is something that applies to mid and senior level, right? And that comes up much later in the game, right? So yeah. So what are the best websites for researching salaries? So we said Levels.fyi already, so we're going to move on unless Sarah wants to add to it.
No, that's the only one.
Yeah. So can I ask, how soon can I expect to be promoted to next level, assuming the performance is excellent? This is probably what they mean is at the time of negotiation. Is this a pertinent question?
In terms of promotions, it's really dependent on the company too and the manager. Some manager might say, I want to see, I want to make sure that you can sustain at this level, and they want to see more data points. So for example, it might take more than just one performance review for them to promote you. And it's really dependent on the manager and the company to be completely honest when it comes to promotion.
Okay. So what's your take on handling competing offers? How would you compare them? What are the different things to look for?
I would compare them from a total compensation point of view. So for some company that offer an annual performance bonus, they might come in a little bit lower in base because they want to kind of give themselves room to give you more bonus later, versus company that don't offer a performance bonus, they might come in a little bit higher in base. So because everyone has a different compensation structure, it's really hard to compare like base 1 versus base 2. Take calculation from total compensation and just compare the total compensation number. Another thing to look at too is beyond just the money, what project that excite you more. Company culture is also really important. I've had friends who, go for the money and then the position just happened to be not the right fit and they leave before they even get all of the bonuses, versus someone who decided to go with less money, but they decided to go with a company that they feel most aligned with, and they ended up staying a long term, and therefore they get more bonuses for the performance or the work that they put in.
Okay. So who decides your final salary, recruiter or manager?
Neither one of them. The final salary is usually determined by the compensation team. So usually there's a team or maybe like a finance person or maybe even a comm analyst to do all of the calculation. For a bigger company, hiring manager don't get involved in this process at all whatsoever. Compensation team is a team that determine the final salary number.
Okay. So the company says this is the final offer. Is it okay to continue to negotiate? Is there a risk that they might move on to the next candidate?
If your recruiter said that multiple times, this is final, and they even offer for you to talk to the manager for 30 minutes, usually the recruiter is telling the truth here in terms of like, it's pretty final. You don't, if there isn't a risk to just ask for another, like, can we try one more time? If you do happen to be really firm with your request and you're just like, hey, I really need 150, and let's say if the current offer is at 130, you already asked for another round of 150, the recruiter already said no. If you keep asking for it, the recruiter might say, hey, this position might not be a good fit, but they will let you know. They won't just like pull the offer because you asked for more.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, good data points there. So can you negotiate if you do not have a lot of experience, and if so, how do you do?
So this question's in terms of, because the experience usually already been taken into consideration at the stage of the interview process in terms of like leveling. So if you may not have a lot of years of experience, you might be considered for a junior level instead of mid-level. For example, each level has its own unique compensation band. Like I said, recruiter usually will always start you out on the lower end. There's always room to go.
Okay. So are return to work programs after a gap also negotiable? Would it be reasonable to expect what you used to make?
So the return to work program usually for a company to it's usually a diversity inclusion program in terms of like expecting previous, if you make 300K before, for example, and you maybe take a year gap and then you want to re-enter the workforce, if it's the same job family and same level and everything, most of the time you're going to get paid around the same, if not higher, because of the compensation change. Like I said, compensation planning happened once a year. That number get re-evaluated every year, but just because you take a 1-year gap, usually that doesn't even come up. Companies now are pretty understanding of like candidate maybe wanting to take a sabbatical. They don't use that against you or anything when it comes to negotiation.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going through the chat. There was this one question which we already answered via Slido. The next question I see is, if a candidate is working currently and has 10 to 12 years of experience, but had break or gaps in between for some years, does that affect negotiation?
Not at all.
Okay. All right, so I think we should go ahead with the same set of negotiation rules and everything and research, and then be very confident to get what we deserve. So
Yeah.
I am going to ask the audience to actually ask questions if they still have any unanswered ones by unmuting themselves. And we should go one at a time.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to learn more about the negotiation service that you have. That's something new, right?
Yeah. So Zuhair, or do you want to take that, or should Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah can also definitely color in the experience a little bit better even than me, but it is a new service that we launched in late last year. So around September, we launched this new service. Sarah was our first kind of person to kind of come and start like this project for us. And the way we kind of thought about it is we wanted to help candidates increase their salaries because this was something that a lot of people were messaging us on our site about. And people were just genuinely interested in how we could help. And we thought, you know, who better to help you than, you know, recruiters who've been on the other side of the table in this process. And so we kind of assembled a team of former recruiters from a lot of these companies, you know, FANG and like also just generally companies across the board, where they will work with you to help you maximize your offer through a series of sessions. And the way it works, I mean, every negotiation is very situational and specific. And so, you know, there isn't really a general kind of way that we approach it. It's more of a, you know, kind of a recruiter kind of works with you and is in your corner to help you through your situation as it kind of unpacks or unfolds. And so, which is why, you know, our most kind of common purchase is the 3-session package where you initially book a session, you can kind of get context, get help from your recruiter. And then, you know, as things progress, you also have email support. You also have, you know, follow-up sessions that you can have with your recruiter, and they'll help you kind of navigate the situation that you're in, because a successful negotiation kind of has, you know, several back and forths. And for that reason, we also recommend, you know, folks to book with us as early as possible, like you, so that, you know, we can help you prepare for that salary expectations question and kind of, you know, even tackle things earlier on in the process. So, you know, we have the most impact on your compensation.
Awesome. Any other questions? You can also leave them on chat if you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself.
I feel like questions might come up, or if no one asks, I'm just going to address it. With the pandemic, we've seen a lot of companies gone completely remote, and a lot of people, you know, probably this is really important for them to have a positions that's more flexible in terms of location. This question comes up a lot, like how should I determine my compensations? Because you said compensation, you know, is determined based on level and job family as well as location. The location is going to be where you're working from and not by where the company headquarters is at. So for example, if a company is in San Francisco and you're currently living in Austin, Texas, compensation is going to be for Austin, Texas and not San Francisco. So just want to clear that up in terms of like remote work if that comes up.
Yeah, and if people have more questions, you know, feel free to message us on the website at Levels.fyi. You know, we're usually available on the chat and things like that, and so happy to answer questions on there as well if we don't get to it here.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I would really like to extend my thanks once again to Zaheer, Zuhayeer, and Sarah for running a fabulous session and going through every single question that was posed and giving us a good overview of what Levels.fyi is all about and what that company stands for, and addressing the salary negotiation process thoroughly. I see one. Yeah, okay. So almost everybody saying like excellent information, very useful and things like that. And thank you for joining us today and making this session very interesting by posting questions on Slido and also on chat and asking us here. We look forward to seeing you in the future meetup sessions.
Glad it was helpful for everyone.
Yeah, I see a lot of messages. I got many private messages too. So
Aw.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And we look forward to working closely with you, Zaheer, Zuhayeer, and Sarah in future sessions. And
Definitely. Yeah, no, thanks for having us, and we'll hopefully be back. So,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you,
Awesome.
everybody. See
All
you
right.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.